The Quran and its harmony with science and nature. It's unusual to find a book written hundreds of years ago describing scientific phenomena and turning out to be very accurate in its descriptions. How does the Quran measure up in this regard? I'm going to turn to my guest, Nadim Haque, who is a civil engineer by profession, author of many books, From Facts to Values, for example, and most recently, From Microbits to Everything, a 2-volume work. Let me turn to our guest. Brother Nadim, science changes all of the time. We continually make new discoveries. The Quran was written some 1400 years ago. Is there a harmony between the Quranic description of natural phenomena and our modern discoveries of that phenomena?
Yes, there is, and indeed the Quran asks us to challenge the Quran itself. It says that if this book were from other than the God, then surely you would find in it many inconsistencies. So we're actually challenged to find out whether there are any inconsistencies. For example,
has anyone tried to live up to this challenge or try to pursue this challenge?
Yes, I think that there are people who have, for example, among the Muslims are in a healthy way trying to challenge the Quran. There are, and then there are others who are not so friendly with Islam, who have a very cheap way of attacking the Quran. For example, they'll say that, well, in the Quran it says that that the birds are held up in the air by God. Well, we don't see the hand of God, for example, holding it up. But that's what God is trying to convey there is the power of God, because He is the source of everything. So there's nothing that goes against the theory of aerodynamics there. For example, if I say I hold my family together, it doesn't mean I actually hold them together like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Although I'm sure you do hug them on occasion.
Yes. Indeed, there are so many verses in the Quran that deal with that correspond with science. If you want, I can mention a few.
Sure, please.
Okay, so in this century, there was George Lemaitre who was actually a Christian priest, and he hypothesized that the universe came from a big bang. And so everything was compressed together, all the galaxies, and it exploded. Now, in the Quran, it says that, do those who cover the truth not see that the universe and the earth were one piece, and we ripped them apart, and we made every living thing from water? Will they even then not believe? And now we know that the universe is expanding. And in the Quran, it says, we have indeed created this universe with a force. We are most certainly expanding it. We are indeed expanding it. And the word uses musi'una. It means expanding. Literally, it means expanding. It's not a metaphorical, something metaphorical. And we have evidences in embryology and many other areas. So indeed, the Quran does correspond with science and is open to challenge.
Tell us a little bit about embryology. What is that?
Embryology, there are verses. What happened was that there were some Muslim scholars like Sheikh Zindani and others, and they couldn't understand some verses in the Quran pertaining to embryology. For example, there's a verse in the Quran which says that there's a stage when you are like chewed flesh, mudghah. What does that mean, chewed flesh? So what happened is that Keith Moore at the University of Toronto, he was asked about this because he's an expert. And what he found out was that when you're the size of a pinhead, there are some marks.
You're speaking here of the developing embryo.
The developing embryo,
yes.
Exactly. So there are some pinheads the size of a pinhead. You can't see it unless you have a microscope, which they didn't have in that when Prophet Muhammad was on the scene. Microscopes were invented about 1,000 years later, right? So there are some marks there which are called somites, and they become your backbone, but they resemble teeth marks. They resemble flesh that has been bitten into. So that's what the word mudgham is. So yes, the Quran has describes all the stages of the human embryo in a visual way. And I remember that
So someone might say, look,
yeah.
babies must have been aborted from time immemorial, and one observing an aborted fetus would know that this is how it looks like.
Yes, but you need microscopes to know that, because it's impossible. Unless you have extremely good eyesight, which is
microscopic vision.
Microscopic vision.
Yeah.
You need X-ray vision, a lot of things like that. So I think one has to seriously question, how did this come about? Was it aliens? Did aliens come down to Earth and tell Prophet Muhammad about that? Was it some guy who had some knowledge. He was in a cave. He suddenly came out and said to Prophet Muhammad, listen, you know, there's a stage when you're like that, so tell the people that that's chewed flesh. When you think of all these, by the process of elimination, it's just impossible to explain them using all these other hypotheses, and you come to this conclusion that indeed it has to have been revealed by God. These other ideas don't make sense.
You mentioned the statement of the Quran that the universe is expanding. Is this a well-known scientific theory, and is it liable that this theory may soon be changed?
No, it's not a theory, it's a fact. And it's a fact because Edwin Hubble discovered that the galaxies are receding from each other, and it's called redshift. So we know for a fact that the universe is expanding. Now there's a slight problem here in terms of fact. Because what happened is that due to some philosophers, they started saying you cannot arrive at fact, or you cannot arrive at knowledge, Hume and others. And then Karl Popper came, he said you cannot actually end up with a fact, everything is provisional, everything is indeterminate. So a lot of the scientists are in that mode of, well, maybe you cannot really come and realize it's a fact. But that doesn't make sense, because we know, for example, the Earth is a spheroid. Maybe for some very smart Stone Age guy, he may have said to people that it's actually a spheroid, it's not flat. If you walk very far, you're not going to fall off the edge. Other people might say, well, how do we know that? And he'll give his ideas. But now we know that the Earth is a spheroid. So yes, things can indeed become fact.
Is there anything in the Quran that will indicate that the Earth is a spheroid?
I think there's a verse there which talks of the Earth being like an egg shape. So yeah, there is that. And you have a Muslim scientist in the 11th century, Al-Biruni, who talked about, for example, the rotation of the Earth and advanced concepts like that.
Do you think he got that idea from the Quran itself or from some other sources of knowledge?
It's hard to say how he got that idea. It's possible he got it from the Quran, because there's a verse in the Quran which says that the Earth moves and like the clouds move. So there's a verse like that. But the main thing is that the Quran made people think about experimenting, testing things. It's connected to the idea of confirmation. Because from Greek philosophy, you had the ideas of deduction. Aristotle was sitting on his armchair and he's made many comments. Some were right, some were wrong. They were like hits and misses. But with the Muslims, they actually went and did experimentation. They did something and then they generalized it and said, well, if this works here, it'll work there, and then they established certain laws. They said, this is a law.
Okay, so it's a very interesting discussion, but I must cut it short for the time being. Let's take a break, and when we come back, folks, we're going to be looking at the